Good morning, folks. Your resistance history lesson for today is the hardest lesson for anyone to learn. Let's call it the Sheldon White House rule, for no particular reason, because experience is the most brutal teacher. And for many, though, it's the only one that they're going to believe. People don't want to accept that they're living through something that they do not fully understand. They don't want to believe that they are witnessing the slow death of a system they once thought was unshakable, or at the very least unquestionable. They want to trust that institutions will hold, opposition leaders will act, there is a hero out there, and that eventually something will reset our path and return things to normal. But resistance history, pesky thing, shows us otherwise. And the hardest lesson of all is this: there's no normal to return to. There's only what we do next. Historians and scholars of authoritarianism, such as Abby Heffer, who you can follow in real time with her analysis of what's going on, and Tim Snyder, they explain how modern autocrats dismantle institutions, erode democracies, and seize power. Their work is critical, and following it and engaging them on it, particularly Abby, helps us clearly see what the regime is doing and how, and see it in comparative terms, see it in a broader global and historical term. But knowing how authoritarians operate is only half the equation. That's why we do what we do. The question for us in resistance history is, what do we do about it? And that's where resistance history comes in. But as I've learned in teaching these historical moments and learning more about them and engaging in extensive research on them, these are the toughest lessons for people to accept. First, institutions have failed. They are done. If institutions were going to stop this, they would have already done it. Courts alone won't save democracy. Elections alone won't restore balance. Institutions are built to preserve themselves, not to challenge power. To wait for institutional intervention is to surrender just in slow motion. Resistance cannot be outsourced to political processes designed to contain, not dismantle, authoritarian rule. Second, opposition leaders who refuse to resist become complicit. Resistance isn't a speech, it's action. It's not a press conference. Opposition leaders who tell you to stay calm or trust the system rather than actively confronting authoritarianism are not fighting, they're adjusting to it. Many prefer life under a weakened democracy to the risks of true resistance. Consider the stark difference between Chuck Schumer or Gavin Newsom on the one hand and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders on the other. Refusal to resist isn't caution, it's collaboration. Third, this is as bad as it gets is always, always wrong. There is no stopping point where power just stops seizing control. I've got enough. You think Elon Musk is going to say, I've had enough. This is enough for me. The second you believe you've reached the worst point, you're already behind. Hannah Arendt warned that authoritarianism doesn't self-limit. It expands, consolidates, and then normalizes oppression until it either collapses or it's actively resisted. It demands not just your compliance, but your participation, making you an active part of your own oppression. The longer people wait, the harder resistance becomes. So, what else does resistance history teach us? In the words of a lot of the scholars that are informing my approach, James Scott reminds us that power isn't absolute. It constantly struggles to maintain itself. Resistance forces it to expend resources, making oppression costly and unsustainable. We push that. We make it pricey and expensive for them to oppress. And for any of their collaborators to perform their alliance. Albert Camus teaches us that resistance is a moral necessity, not because victory is assured, but because refusing complicity is essential. Joseph Tainter and Arnold Toynbee remind us that collapse is inevitable for systems that overextend themselves. They will burn out. More surveillance, more repression, more coercion. Eventually, authoritarian power becomes unsustainable. But collapse is never on our terms unless we make it so. So what comes next? Be an optimist for your family and friends, but a pessimist in the mirror. There is no scenario where authoritarianism collapses on its own. Resistance is not just important, it's the only way power relinquishes control. There's no normal to return to, folks. There's only what we do now.